So first full practice day on Indianapolis. Thought we got good work in today. Any questions?
We went back and watched. How did
say it again?
We haven't actually asked you about Malcolm, and just, especially how Jordan Jackson and Andy sort of filled in.
I think they did really well, and we had a good rotation. We talked at the start of the season of making sure that we weren't going to look back on a certain game with, especially inside with 90% or so. I thought the plan and the rotation was really good, and those guys played well.
With Lou and remote, how much carryover do you see from what he did in Cincinnati, and what sort of challenge does he bring?
I think there's some. All right. So when you're looking at the cut-ups, we're looking at the 3 preseason games, the regular season game, and then all of Cincinnati, and there are a lot of similarities, and yet there's some things that are different, and you got to prepare for those.
We've asked you a bunch about picking people's brains. Davis Webb has a pretty unique relationship with Daniel Jones. Have you talked to Davis about what he does?
Not really. I know they overlapped, and Daniel played one of his better games, and when you're watching the tape, the first I'm looking at Miami on offense, and there's a game starts 3-0. Indy kicks a field goal, and then there's a turnover. In the next series, it's 10-0, and then there's a fumble. In the next series, it's 17-0. And I don't know at what point of the first quarter, but it was rather quick. Last week's teams were 8-1 when they won the turnover battle, and the 1 was us. And you can't live that way. It's tough. In other words, you're going to play better teams, and so, but clearly they were +3 in that game, and every then statistic, if you looked at it, fell in their favor, and so they look very good on film.
As you were game planning yesterday, did you become aware of all the hubbub around the stadium site?
Listen, Patrick keeps me informed, and certainly Greg and Kerry, and from afar, and being in this as long as I have been, I don't have the history here in Denver, and yet in the day and age where new stadiums are being built, rarely are they staying in the city, privately funded, and with the flexibility. I know the one thing I kept reading was, man, we're used to the snow and the elements, and I'm not gonna speak for Greg and Kerry, but those will all exist, and yet Super Bowls, Final Fours, just on and on and on. I called him this morning. I was a little late with it, but just to congratulate him, in such an early time frame of getting something like that in place at a location where in a vision, and he's super. The two of them are extremely good with a vision, and then we're watching one right now, and so this is another one, and collectively, you guys, myself, Patrick, our goal is to be here to participate in that new vision. But I think it's great for the city.
You mentioned playing in elements. Why is that important in Denver?
I think, listen, there's a sterileness sometimes if you choose to go with, the roof, and I think that there's an advantage for the home team. Natural grass, it's healthier for the players. We wouldn't want to confuse a closed roof with changing how the altitude affects you. Obviously, but I just think the elements are important. I think, and I think certainly I know from speaking with Greg and Kerry and their vision and plan, just having that flexibility to control it to some degree. New York snuck, like literally in the middle of the night, snuck a Super Bowl in. and they were 2 days away from that being a catastrophe. But I think, look, it's forward thinking, and it ages me because the first game in this current stadium, I was with the Giants as a young assistant. So I think it's exciting.
Sean, you said you feel like the right ownership, is one of the biggest keys for the franchise for you.
Absolutely.
When you look at kind of the spectrum, possible, uninvolved versus extremely involved ownership, like what do you define as the right?
That's a tough question because there's some, in a 4-hour interview in the beginning of this process, there's a lot of, and I think that it's just been real clean, and both of them are great communicators. Both of them think outside the box all the time, and I kind of think that same way, and you appreciate him allowing and trusting you to do your job, and yet you're always still proving that, hey, you're doing it well. So I've said this before, it's not like etched in stone, but and I don't want you to take it the wrong way, but there's 20, 21 others where, the late Vince Lombardi could go there and may not have the career he had at some of these other organizations, and it's just the truth. And so I wasn't looking to find the division with Mahomes and Reed, but what I was looking for is the right ownership group, and I felt like I had that in New Orleans as well as a young coach, and you begin to appreciate and realize how much that can really dictate your trajectory and your team's trajectory. And so it's worked very well.
Sean, you talked about in the past searching for the perfect play when you go back through film or study or calling a perfect game. When you coach someone like Bo, is there ever a sense that I don't need perfection, I need precision? Do you ever have to?
Well, that's a great question because the perfection comes from the precision, and so when a game ends and you evaluate it, and then you say, all right, how are we with the details? We're fairly young, and so if we feel like the answer isn't maybe up to what we want, then we've got to look at how much, and then not just cut back, but evaluate. And we're always trying to evaluate what do they do best. But look, I don't know how many games I've called, but that's one of those where I came away from it like, man, I've got to be a lot better. And it was one of those games, especially early, and so in that self-check, in that process, and the day after, if you will, if you're not careful, sometimes the game can be over and you're on to the next opponent, and you haven't really, you've heard me use that term, debriefed properly. And we're really trying to pay attention to that, so that regardless of the outcome, this accelerated curve that everyone's on, where everyone's in a race here these first 4 weeks, and we've got to be leading the way, and so in all areas.
Sean, you said that it's interesting to me how you point the finger in the mirror where some of us saw Bo maybe press it.
Yeah, but if you looked at the down and distance, the hash marks, some of the calls, it would be too hard to explain it all. But from a timing standpoint, there's that relationship where when I give a certain play, it can, at the end of the game, we were all on the same. That was going to be an aggressive play, and we're all comfortable with it. So, but it's more of some of the early plays in the first half. and then it's also cleaning up the details within the framework of whether it's run or pass.
Sean, you said this offseason you didn't think teams were just going to willingly give up the 35 on kickoff, and there was a big spike in week 1. How do you kind of assess when you go back?
Yeah, I mean, it was a tremendous spike, right? And so we spent, I can't tell you how many hours were spent on whether the tush push was safe or not. In other words, now if we don't like it, that's fine. But there was countless hours and doctors and we just finished with a rule that was going to increase kick returns, dramatically. And so look, I won't be surprised to see teams taking the ball rather than deferring, because let's say the drive start is the 34. And if I put the ball on the 34-yard line today, it's not a neutral field position. Let's pretend I went 3 and out and didn't gain a yard and I punted. All right, well, they're probably going to be at the 20, and so what's the neutral field position? I mean, our goal, if we're backed up on the 1, is 2 first downs and we're back to neutral field position. And so when you can start a game in plus field position, in other words, you get a first down and you punt, you're defending the other team on the 15. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that tweak a little if you're looking to get off to a better start. I think you'll see, now it didn't happen this weekend, but eventually I think you'll see a rise in scoring because the average drive starting field, I mean, if you just do every year, if a possession starts at the 5, the 10, and you work your way all the way back, the percentages of scoring work accordingly. And so it only makes sense if the average drive start is a little further, then the points will go up. But this weekend, looking at the touchdown reel, the longest was 50 yards. There weren't any, beyond the 50-yard line. And I would say the scoring maybe was down. In week 1, oftentimes that may be the case. But I think it's a significant rule change. And the other thing that's interesting is, I know we talk about the box, and the box is a vertical box. It has to land, it can't go, in other words, into the end zone or short of but we still have this sideline thing that we're trying to get changed to make it just a box. We won't let that go. So the sideline is the 40, all right, the touchback or into the end zone or short of it is the 35. We saw a big play the other night, where Minnesota's going to return it regardless just to get the clock going. And I think you could just literally dribble it off the tee and put it on the 35.
Sean, with Tyler Warren, how important does this kind of linebacker sort of become in terms
I think and I give credit to Indianapolis, in unique ways. They're moving him, doing things that are built around what we saw in college. He's got snaps at Wildcat. We're going to see that this year. I don't know when. He's got, and so there obviously was a Warren plan, and you're going to have to defend that. And he's one of those guys you just say he's a real good football player. I don't, all the measurables, and there are a number of things, and he has been for most of his career.
What did you think of him coming out of the draft?
We liked him. Yeah, we liked him. He was different than maybe a couple of the other tight ends, but he's big, rugged, physical, strong. I mean, clearly you can come up with a vision for all of the things he does. He catches it in traffic well, and he's going to be in traffic at times, but we liked him.
Going back to the kickoff just for a minute, the one right before the half where they got the big return field goal, is that?
We had 5 minutes at the break to talk about it. Do we want to cover? And the feeling was, we felt strong enough. I'm talking advanced Riz, looking at the clock, so we kicked to cover. You kick the touchback and it's the 35, and just do the math, 35 to whatever. And so you're hoping with the way the rules are set up that you can cover, all right, south of the 30. And so we didn't on that play, but we discussed it. And
The Colts scored on every possession. I think first team in several decades to do that. Do you have an appreciation for what that?
yeah, it bothered. When I saw it, I laughed a little. We played in Detroit once, and we had a punter who bought 40 tickets for his family, and we never punted. We didn't score on the last drive. We fumbled the ball, and we were up 40-some points, but it was like we wanted to, then we had another game where we took a knee on downs, but we never punted. But they never punted and scored on 50 years or whatever. It's impressive.
Coach, with Pat Bryant, on Monday you kind of pointed to his snap count. Is there something you're looking for him to
Well, no, it's something. I just think in our groupings we can improve that. That was part of the, the day after, right away on my desk I have plays for all the players. The offensive linemen tell me how many plays there were offensively, at least graded, and then special teams, total pitch count, and so, we can improve that.
Sean, he didn't get as much fanfare, but what do you think of Riley Moss's game?
I thought he played well. Listen, when it's quiet, I don't know that he's going to initially at this age get the fanfare, but he played really well. I mean, defensively, the whole defense got a game ball, and that happens maybe once every 3 years. The numbers and the pressure and the takeaways and third down, and I mean, depending on how that game's going, that situation I'm in at the end of the game, different offense, different, the flow of the game's going differently. The decision might be different, but the other thing that was, it wasn't lost in the news, but their quick drive starts, where all of a sudden you have these watch this moments where they're starting on our own 30 because of because of a play, a return, or they're. I think they give up 3 points on sudden change, minus the 50-yard line, and that was exceptional.
Sean, you guys obviously haven't put Dre Greenlaw on IR. Still feel confident?
Yeah. So nothing to update you on. Progress is going well.